And welcome to Lone Star Yell Fight, where your favorite Aggie, Andy Tom Chesson, and your favorite Longhorn, James Christopher, take you deep inside the two flagship programs of Texas football.
Somehow, there are only 4 weeks left in regular season college football. As much as we look forward to the 11-game season and then the potential playoffs, we didn't play 11 games anymore. Play 12. I don't even know anymore.
Yeah,
maybe it's 13. There's a lot, but it goes so quickly. What else is going to go quickly? Well, this show, hopefully. At least it's going to feel that way.
Yeah.
I'm Andy Tom Chesson. That's James Christopher. This is Lone Star Yell and Fight. We're here to talk all about college football, specifically through the lens of the two flagship programs from the great state of Texas.
Texas Tech and TCU. Oh.
Hey, that was a slightly entertaining high school game last night that I almost watched. But Tech won a game, so good for Tech. I guess their coach gets to stay employed for another week or so.
Another week, yeah. Remember, he's the guy that the Big 12 commissioner wanted to go beat Texas. I know that game still hasn't happened yet, but yeah.
I mean, that's your big rivalry game, right? Just ignore the OU game. Ignore next year when you're playing Arkansas and OU and A&M.
Yeah, we'll miss that Texas. We'll miss the dust up in West Texas for sure.
You don't even have to go to Lubbock this year. I think that's the thing that Tech fans, not that we plan to pick on Tech fans this week, but I see Texas eventually scheduling for their non-conference games one game with a Baylor or a Tech or somebody from the Big 12 that they have a historical run-up of games with.
Sure.
I also think none of those schools are prepared for Texas to say, we're not coming to your stadium. You're just going to need to come play here.
Right.
If you want to play Texas, it's in Austin. We're not coming to Lubbock anymore. Why would we do that to ourselves?
Right. No, I completely agree.
We specifically left this league so we don't have to go to Waco.
Yeah. We'll do home and homes with the Big Ten school. We'll do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe in November when we have an opening, you guys can come up here and instead of Abilene Christian, we can fit you in.
We'll slide you right in.
How you doing this week?
Good. It's funny. I know we're going to, is this the segue to dive into our game? Was that?
Well, yeah. I mean, that was,
yeah.
Because usually right, wrong, or indifferent, usually how things went last Saturday is still affecting me this Friday.
No, I think you're right. And, look, Longhorns got the win. It was convincing, could have been more convincing. Longhorns still having goal line issues. They definitely ran the football well. You saw a lot about what you had talked about wanting to see out of Malik on the last episode, where he did hit some home run balls that he didn't have a chance to really get to throw in his first start. But it was an inconsistent outing. I think, again, red zone issues are still an issue. And part of the reason why Sark said he didn't play Arch Manning is he never felt like the offense was ever really in a rhythm. So this is the week. This is the week I'm always nervous about. Something about K-State.
And we'll talk a little bit about that game, but it has somehow turned into a top 25 matchup if you use a certain set of rankings, which ESPN does. College football doesn't seem to want to use those rankings because we'll talk about that in a little bit. Also a ranked matchup in the CFP playoffs. Go into a little bit more about Malik, though. I think for the rest of the season, he's your starting quarterback unless Ewers gets healthy quickly. Because I'm reading different things on Ewers that I know Sark is, well, he's very tough and it could be week to week. But the reality is he's probably not back for you guys until Iowa State at the earliest.
That's what I was thinking too. Look, I think he's a tough kid. I think he doesn't show a lot of. I think some of the critique we had last week, I think, holds up. He doesn't show a lot of touch on some of those. He throws the intermediate ball pretty well. He doesn't show a lot of touch when he's throwing into the flat, which I notice is still kind of the majority of his pass plays are called to the flat. And he can hit the home run ball when it's there. And I don't know what that means for him starting. I did think there was an exponential improvement from going into the game with in the fourth quarter to what last week looked like. And this week's just going to be a different test. And so I think the biggest thing I saw was an improvement on the Longhorn defense, which I think might be the biggest plus going into K-State, where it could be one of those ugly defensive battles where running the ball and playing good defense is going to be what wins the game for Texas.
Well, and I think it's got to be encouraging for Texas fans. I also think, a little bit of the heavy emphasis of throwing the flat and safe passes. That's how you bring a quarterback that's got very little game experience into a conference game. I mean, you've got to play him. You don't really have another option. I think the reality is that Arch probably isn't ready. He could play if he had to, but literally has taken no snaps outside of first week. Didn't he get in a game like
I think he did. I think he
handed non-conference, got a series, and I think he handed off the ball a lot.
Yeah.
So it's what you should do. You should play it safe and then take your chances when you get there. I think the biggest step will be kind of this week. What improvement does he have now that he's had a game that's been his? He's not technically looking over his shoulder. We'll talk about Kansas State in a little bit, but I think it is a big step up against a defense that's better than what you guys faced this past week. But, good win. It certainly wasn't the unnecessary nail biter that off of Cullen Avenue from 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, and I think that was it. It for as much as there was a problematic performance at times from Malik, it was a dominant performance by the Longhorns as a whole. And we haven't seen that a whole lot in the last few years. Anytime something broke down, the whole team would break down. And I think, even for as much as Hudson Card last year did yeoman's work and everything, but you didn't feel confident with Hudson Card starting a game a lot of the time. I actually feel like Malik, I think I will feel confident going forward with him starting, because I do think that there's room for a lot of improvement. And I think everything around him is just better than what Hudson Card had to deal with last year. So I think that's a big part of it for me.
Well, and I think that's, if you're program building, not just trying to win games in the framework of a season, and a head coach in college football is obviously trying to do both. I think it behooves most college coaches now to build a system that isn't necessarily quarterback reliant. Yes, it's great if you have a great quarterback and it makes things a lot easier, but you have to continue to win games if your quarterback's not out, if they have a bad game, if you have a down recruiting cycle and you're playing a guy that's maybe a 3-star that's, he's at his ceiling. I think that we're facing a similar thing in College Station right now, where we have a very, very good quarterback who is, if he can stay healthy, is very likely going to be a top three round NFL pick in Connor Wegman.
Right.
And when he's not playing, it looks like he's not playing. The whole offense is different. What we can run is different. And I don't know. A&M won last week. We beat South Carolina. We probably should have beat South Carolina by at least 2 more touchdowns, but it is what it is. It was a home game. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. The team looked like they slept in for the first quarter, because I think the first 2 series were 3 and out. And any game we win the rest of the year is going to be because our defense stood up, and they did that. They were very effective. Right now, we're the number 1 ranked defense in the SEC, number 7 in the country for total defense, I think, and very high up in all the defensive rankings. So all of that recruiting, all of those 5 stars that you saw from a couple of years ago, those linemen, they're paying dividends. Our problem right now is that we scored not at all in the first quarter against a very bad South Carolina team. Then we woke up and scored 21 points in the second quarter and looked like a team that kind of figured it out and knew what they were doing. And we were aggressive, and we went for it on 4th and short, and we had success doing that. And then we come back out after halftime against the same South Carolina team and managed to score 9 points the rest of the game. We have
not the kind of halftime adjustment you're looking for.
Yeah, we have not scored a second half touchdown. I want to say in like 4 games, something like that. It's not a great number. Although, thanks SEC officiating, because we should have. There's a wonderful picture of tight end Max Wright, who is a 250-pound white guy. He's not the guy you expect to make the toe touch in the end zone while he's cradling a ball, but it was perfect. And they called it on the field and said not a touchdown. Rightfully went to instant replay. Instant replay shows him dragging his foot through the end zone on the grass. Now, it is grass, so we don't kick up black pellets everywhere. That, I think, is part of the problem.
Damn you and you being in an ag school that can grow grass.
And literally had the ball secured, cradled securely in his hand. And they looked at it for what felt like 20 minutes. And it's like, ruling on the field stance.
Yeah.
So, but even beyond that, if you had given us 4 more points, that's only 12 against a very, very bad South Carolina team who was very beat up, continued to have injuries. Even Spencer Rattler couldn't save them.
Spencer Rattler couldn't save them?
He couldn't save him. And matter of fact, he had to learn what intentional grounding was, because I think he had 3 of them, because rather than A&M's pass rush was so effective at one point that he would just take like a 5-step drop and just throw the ball. But he wasn't throwing the ball at anybody, so it became a problem. This was very much a survive and advance kind of week for A&M, and that would be great if we had lost 1 game, but we've already lost 3, so I'm not sure what we're advancing to other than the Texas Bowl.
Well, I mean, you are going to make a bowl game, and I know that it doesn't take a lot of solace when it's the Texas Bowl or whatever, but I know we talked about it every year on the show. It's those extra practices, and I think that is going to at least do something. But you brought up something that I thought was interesting, because in many ways, what you said about you have to build a non-quarterback dependent system. And it's exactly what Mac Brown felt in January of 2010 when Colt McCoy walked off the field and he was like, oh crap, what am I going to do? But is it possible to do that and at least have a decent backup quarterback in this era of the transfer portal where people can just jump in and jump out? It's like, it feels like depth is going to be one of the major factors that are going to be affected by how quickly you can get in and out of the transfer portal.
Well, I mean, and that's A&M's got a great situation. Max Johnson is not a bad option for a backup quarterback, and there's a lot of schools he'd be starting at. Our offensive problems go way beyond who the quarterback is, but Connor Wegman is enough of a talent that he could overcome things that Max Johnson can't overcome. My point is more for our team, at least. Why are we putting our backup quarterback in situations where he's having to overcome those same kind of things? Why are we not putting in hot reads for him? One read, if he has trouble going through his progressions, stop making him go through his damn progressions.
Right.
Literally throw some slants. Just find 5 plays that he can run successfully and run them. And yeah, it limits you. But I go back to, most recently with Mike Leach, the late great Mike Leach. I think he had 3 plays in his playbook. All they did was run those same 3 plays, but they ran them so well. Even if you know what's coming, you still have to beat that execution. And I hate to sound like Jimbo because that's his favorite buzzword. We got to execute better. Well, you do have to execute better, but at some point you've got to give them something that's executable. And I think that's all the offensive brain power that sits off of Houston Street in College Station, and they can't get out of their own way because I think at some level they're trying to coach to perfection versus coaching what they have. And it's not a sustainable model. If you have a generational quarterback, great.
Right.
And I don't begrudge somebody trying to recruit a generational quarterback. Every coach should be doing that. But you've got to realize that some of those guys aren't going to pan out, and you still have to be able to score points. And that, to me, is the gap right now for Jimbo and his offensive staff. The good news is, as poorly as his offensive staff has prepared their team, DJ Durkin on the defensive side has that defense playing at an elite level for 2023 college football. Because defenses are really handicapped. You don't get to kill people anymore as they cross the middle and things like that.
Yeah, they have a whole different set of rules to play by.
Yeah, stupid not using your hands to the face. Anyway, as much as it can be, it was a success. But I think if you ask most Aggie fans, it didn't put a great taste in your mouth going into this week against Ole Miss in Oxford. Before we get that, I want to congratulate the Texas Longhorns. The first, and that's not easy for me to do, the first college football playoff rankings, which I'm going to go ahead and just say this for the purpose of the show. It's really the only rankings that matter.
Yeah,
Before
now,
we
yeah.
get into
These
this,
games.
Texas is number 7. They're in a good position right now. I want to talk about why they're in a good position. The AP and the USA Today coaches poll, I guess is what we call it now, get published preseason. And they're based on a lot of who's popular and what you perceived happened at the end of last year that might be good for this year.
Sure.
I don't think there's a lot more thought about that. The coaches poll shouldn't be called the coaches poll. It should be called the intern working in the AD's office.
To say the guy in the sports information department. That's
Yeah. I'm the second year intern, so I get to vote this year for Nick Saban. But they're based on nothing. But they do influence a lot of things, including who gets what television slots.
Sure. And also put you in a starting point. So if you fall, you're not going to fall as far.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's based on nothing. I would love a world where maybe this CFP ranking comes out a little bit earlier than last week of October. But I think rankings prior to 4 games in are fully meaningless, and they should be treated that way. Unfortunately, that's not the system we have.
Yeah, Mac used, again, bringing up Mac Brown again on this show, but used to talk openly about the fact that the first ranking should have come out to October 1st.
It's silly, but I think this is a better system, even if most of us don't understand exactly how they're calculated. There's a
I'm not sure they do. So
the top 4 right now, if the playoffs were held tomorrow, some people would be upset because they haven't bought their tickets yet. But Ohio State is number 1. Georgia is number 2. Both those teams are undefeated. Michigan is number 3, and they're big cheaters, and but they're right now number 3. And then Florida State, I think the surprise team out of that group is number 4.
Am I doing this right for Michigan? Or
sure. I mean, no team has ever cheated other than the Houston Astros. Yeah. So it is what it is. Texas comes in at number 7 behind Washington and Oregon. OU is at number 9, and I'm picking out on those 2 teams. A&M is not ranked. Just get that out of the way. I'm mentioning Texas and OU at 7 and 9 because I think one of those teams ends up in the top 4 with the way I expect the rest of the season to go. If I'm looking at this top 4, one of Ohio State and Michigan has to lose because they play each other.
Yeah.
And Washington and Oregon have already played each other, but the likelihood that one of them doesn't lose another game between now and the end of the season is not likely, which sets kind of a scenario where Texas controls their own destiny, right?
Yeah.
So you win your 4 regular season games, you're going to be in the Big 12 championship. You win that. I don't know how you're not at least the number 4 team at that point.
Yeah, I would, especially.
And I know we're looking ahead 5 weeks to what happens through those next 5 games, but what's the feeling that you have and that I guess Longhorn fans have about that initial ranking? Is 7 right? Should it be worse, better?
Well, I think there's for those of us who are older like myself, one of the things I have noticed about our fan base is there's not a lot of looking ahead. I think Longhorn fans are a little gun shy to look beyond the next week anyway. We've been here before where like, oh, look at it, as long as we do this, and the other thing, and then the other thing doesn't happen. I'm having weird, although not as consequential vibes of 2008, where you had kind of a similar situation to what we have now. So for people listening, Texas is ahead of OU despite having the head-to-head because Texas has a better win, Alabama, than OU's loss, Kansas. So that's kind of where we are. And I do think, well, we could talk about whether we think they're head-to-head. I do think that some issues Oklahoma has were exposed by Kansas, and I'm not sure that they won't get exposed again between now and the end of the season. But that is the logic there. I can't fault the logic. But these rankings, especially right now, are also volatile. I don't know that anybody's thinking too much into where the Longhorns are sitting. I think that there's still a percentage of us that are like, hey, number 7, that's pretty good considering where this program has come from, considering the fact that we've had this playoff system for almost a decade now, or has it even been a decade? And the Longhorns have never really been ranked this high ever in them. and certainly not made the playoff yet. So I think there's still a little bit of cautious optimism, but I do think Texas being ahead of OU makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're right on with the level of loss you had versus the level of loss they had. And I will say Kansas is a good team this year. They're a very solid program. But OU's got their issues, losing to Kansas, and they probably should have lost to Central Florida the week before. It very clearly to me, and I know the transitive property in college football does not work.
Yeah.
But it was very clear to me that they did everything they could to beat Texas. And after that, they've kind of coasted. And I know they've, like everybody else, they've had their injuries. They've had some schematic problems because of that. But, the reality is that if you put a trending arrow next to one of those teams, the trending down arrow is certainly OU.
Yeah.
Although I guess y'all are all in like a 5-way tie for first place.
Yes.
Right?
I mean, that's a lot of football to be played. Mike Gundy and Brian Bosworth, I guess, are going to arm wrestle at midfield before the game on Saturday.
So one of those is a man, and one of those is steroid. Rage machine.
Gundy, I appreciate your heart. I'm not sure you'll have an arm left after arm wrestling with Mr. Bosworth.
Yeah, I had the fortune of walking past Brian Bosworth in an airport, I think within the last 2 or 3 years. He's still a giant man, even though he's very clearly cycled off, 50 years ago.
Whatever that is, whatever he was cycling on, he's off.
I think there's some other interesting things. There's a lot of Big 12 representation in these rankings, which is a little bit surprising to me. I will say, watching this system for the last couple of years, this top 25 is going to look completely different in 2 weeks, and certainly in 3 weeks or in 5 weeks. But Air Force, I want to give a shout out. They made the last spot at top 25, and for a service academy, even a fake service academy like Air Force.
Hey man, off they go into the Wild Blue college football playoff ranking.
Hey, it's great that kids that play video games can also serve in the military.
Hey, shout out to our Air Force friends that are actual fighter pilots, not just the drone pilots who pretend to be.
They came in at 25. Tulane, from the, what are they? I don't even know. ACC,
So Tulane had time to stop their anti-Semitic riots to play some football.
Well, I think probably the football players don't necessarily show up for the protests.
That's probably.
I know that Tulane's not a big school, but I think they probably have enough students to do both separately.
Do both. That's good. Good for them.
Mike Gundy has certainly rescued his season, because I think we were all kind of wondering if he was going to have a job at the end of the year beginning. OSU's coming in at 22. Kansas, we talked about, is 21. USC and UCLA are still hanging around. I'm not worried about either of those teams. Utah after that. Tennessee, Oregon State, Notre Dame, LSU, who doesn't play defense at all, but you score a lot of points, I guess you can be up here. Louisville, Missouri, Penn State, Ole Miss, who A&M is playing this weekend at number 10. And then the rest of the top 10, Alabama, as we mentioned, Texas, Oregon, Washington, and then those top 4. So I think it's a pretty good representation. And I think going forward, as we're moving into an era where there's going to be 12 playoff teams, I haven't done the math on this because I know, like, Tulane, I think under the rules as they've been currently stated, Tulane would get a spot automatically because they would be a conference championship, conference champion in this. But I think you've got a pretty good distribution between Big Ten, SEC, what currently exists as the Pac-12, and the Big 12, and the ACC is represented by one team. But, that's what's probably going to happen as we go forward, because I don't think SMU is going to move the needle for the ACC next year.
No.
In fact, they won't be able to afford to move the needle because they're not taking a television distribution for the next 7 years.
I find it interesting, though. I think USC to me is interesting right now because I think everybody thought Lincoln Riley going over there, LA, that whole thing was a match made in heaven. And I've seen a lot of speculation that either by the school's choice or he might not be the head coach of USC when they go to the Big Ten.
I can tell you the belief of why he left OU when he did was it was, right after the move to the SEC was announced. And it was clear to us in the SEC that, with all of our insight, that Lincoln Riley's probably dodging having to play real competition every week. Because right, wrong, or indifferent, the Big 12, as it was constructed to that point, you had solid teams, but you didn't have great teams.
Yeah, sure.
I think that's fair. And so he moves to the Pac-12, where again,
you have 2 or 3 games a season that you really got to work on.
You have to worry about, and you can certainly schedule your non-conference to be as attractive as you need it to be, and you win a lot of games, you make a lot of money, and you live in LA. It's not a bad life. But now they're moving into the Big 10, 16, 24, whatever they are, and there's going to be a step up in competition. And so you're starting to hear rumors, and we're hearing it here in Houston and in College Station, that maybe he's looking for a NFL job next. And that
what
could
if he becomes head coach of the Cowboys? That'd be the second OU coach I'll have to stomach.
It wouldn't bother me. I'm not a Cowboys fan.
Fair. That, you know what? You're right. It wouldn't. And that's good.
I mean, that's good. Sounds great.
Boy, isn't that neat?
Yeah. But it's interesting. It's something certainly to keep an eye on. Another thing to keep an eye on is how upset the Big Ten coaches seem to continue to be getting about this whole Michigan deal.
Yeah.
There was a conference call, I guess, earlier this week where they do a coaches conference call, and evidently Harbaugh got off, and the rest of the coaches stayed on and started laying into Big Ten leadership about something's got to be done. You can't continue to ignore this. I know it's a name program, but you look at his record, you look at Harbaugh's record from before when allegations started for this, the sign stealing and some other things he's been doing, and I'm calling it sign stealing. It's not really what it is, to today. And Harbaugh was in trouble for a while, and now all of a sudden they're a 10-game-a-year winning program, and you as a conference seem to be just looking the other way about it. Is anything going to come out of this?
No. This, to me, it's so funny to me how this feels like the 2019 when the allegations broke for the Stros. And it's like, look, everyone's going to clutch their pearls. I do not believe that Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines are the only teams who do things like this. And I'm not saying that that makes it right. I just find it so funny that a lot of coaches that I don't think a lot of people see with a lot of integrity are acting up in arms with it when there's a likelihood that there's stuff going on their staffs too. And it seems like, why would you go a little overboard on it? We've already discussed last week how you can defend against this by changing your signs up. And I personally don't think anything's going to happen. I think if it does, it'll be Jim Harbaugh deciding to exit to go back to the NFL under maybe less than his choice circumstances. But no, I don't know where you sit on it, but to me, I think it's not a big deal.
I think there's a very interesting quote in this article from The Athletic, which they, by the way, folks, if you try to cancel The Athletic, they will literally give you a year subscription for $1. So just keep that in mind.
Unfortunately, there are 4 people writing for The Athletic now. So
yeah, but I mean, you get what you pay for.
If you like Chandler Rome covering Aggie football, that's where we're heading. So,
but it's the Sirius XM of athletic sports. I don't want this service. What if we give it to you for free? I guess. Okay, you're a subscriber. The quote from the article that I found really interesting, and this is from a unidentified third Big Ten coach. The Big Ten can't pound its chest for the last 30 years about how it does the right thing ethically and then have this go on. If this were a team in the bottom half of the Big Ten, would this be handled in the same way? And the answer is no, it wouldn't. And very clearly, this third coach from the Big Ten is in the bottom half of the SEC. This isn't Ohio State or Penn State going, hey, Michigan's doing something wrong. It's an inequity play for sure, but there is the reality that there are haves and have-nots in college football, and some teams are lucky to be in conferences.
That's the thing. Some teams are lucky to be in conferences. I also don't buy this integrity thing for a minute. Urban Meyer's program smelled from down here, from Austin, Texas, the entire time he was there. And now, in fact, we saw some of that stuff leaking out with the Tom Herman stuff. I mean, the integrity, the do things right. This is the same conference that had Penn State, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that we should be really careful when we label entire conferences with, and obviously, obviously having little boys touch doesn't affect on-field product, but let's calm down before we get too hyperbolic with how integrity really does drive our conference, particularly the last 30 years. I think, again, I just, when people get a little too overly just loud and chest beating on the other side of a situation like this, it makes me wonder, what are they overcompensating for?
Well, everybody's trying to distract from something, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about, I don't even know what we're talking about, but one of those bottom half historically Big Ten teams at Northwestern had to fire their coach in the offseason because of a hazing scandal. I'm sure Northwestern would much rather you be talking about Michigan stealing some signs off a sideline or videotaping a practice. I think the reality is that all college football programs, all of them, even Notre Dame, have something they would rather you not know about.
Yes.
I think that's one of the things, and I know we talked about Deion a lot. I think that's one of the things that rubs people in the coaching community wrong about Deion Sanders and his staff is they're very open about the realities of college football in 2023. And a lot of these coaches would like you to pretend that it's like it was in 1970, where these are student athletes just trying to get a degree. And God willing, some of them will go into the NFL, but a lot of them are just going to be productive citizens. That's not what college football is. It is a minor league for the NFL.
Yeah.
And the thing that we all pretend college football is stopped about the time that the NCAA stopped controlling the football or the TV contracts.
I just think the idea of learning signals and decoding them and figuring out what the play is going on is happening with every single team. Honestly, it should be happening with every single team, even if it's as simple as looking at game tape or watching a broadcast and you're still seeing some of those things happen on the sideline. To me, I would be disappointed if I didn't feel like the Longhorns weren't doing their best to get every single competitive advantage that they could in a football game.
Well, I mean, it's the old Eddie Guerrero thing. Not really Eddie Guerrero. You're not cheating, you're not trying. And I think people hear the cheating word and forget the rest of that. It is literally finding where the edge of those rules are and doing everything you can to gain an advantage. And I think that any program that's serious about winning is doing that to some extent. Maybe it's not videotaping a practice, but it is something else that your favorite coach would rather you not talk about or know about. I think that's the reality. And I don't pretend that A&M doesn't do it. I don't think you pretend that Texas doesn't do something along those lines. Whatever it is, and it may not be, again, videotaping an opponent's practice, but it's something where you're trying to gain an advantage. That's what their job is.
Yeah, to me, it feels more like SMU in the 80s, where they did what everybody else was doing to a point that it couldn't be ignored. But to pretend like it wasn't happening at every single level, I think is silly and naive.
Well, that's if for those of you who may not have watched it, and I don't know how you wouldn't if you're a college football fan, please go subscribe to Disney Plus, take the free trial or whatever, and watch the Pony Excess documentary that was the ESPN 30 for 30. I've probably watched it 20 times, and Jim's exactly right. The issue was not the first time SMU got caught. It's that they continued the payroll because they had to meet the payroll, or else they were going to have a bunch of players sue them for breach of contract. That was the actual fear. So they kept doing it. That's what got them the death penalty. But every team in the Southwest Conference at that point was doing something. And I think to the point that only Rice didn't get some level of probation during that time period.
Yeah,
and
that's because they're,
we saw what Rice's record was.
Right. We saw Rice. So, hey, I don't think we've actually talked about A&M's matchup today. And I know we're about out of time, but so Texas versus Mississippi, A&M versus Mississippi. Look, the fact is I think that at a minimum, you're guaranteed to be 7-5, which is a 2-game improvement on last year. Taking the Connor Wigman injury, where does that put you mentally about this season if it shakes out that way?
I am player agnostic at this point. My issue is Jimbo and his offensive coaching staff, and it's going to continue to be until I don't even know if winning out fixes the problem until Jimbo fixes his problems. As far as the game this week, I don't expect to win. I think Lane Kiffin has Jimbo's number, and Lane Kiffin knows he has Jimbo's number. And as much as it's played on the field, I do think there's a certain psychological advantage that even a meathead like Joey Freshwater, has over Jimbo, and he'll take advantage of it. Having said that, Ole Miss is known for their really high scoring offense and taking shots downfield. But when they've had to play a real defense this year, which A&M does have, Alabama, they scored 10 points against Alabama. They scored 27 against Arkansas, who's not a great team, as Scott McIntyre would let you know. They scored 28 against Auburn. They scored 33 against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's not a good team. So this isn't necessarily schematically a team that's going to come out and put up 50 unless you're playing LSU, who plays no defense this year. So if A&M has a shot, and I do not expect us to win, I expect to be really pissed off around 2:30, but also somehow resigned to what it's going to be. Life of a sports fan.
That's right.
If A&M has a shot, it's because the defense stood up and made Jackson Dart and that offense in Oxford work really hard. There's a bunch going against A&M this week, including a ridiculous losing streak on the road against ranked teams. And as we mentioned, Ole Miss is number 10 in the current college football playoff rankings. So I'm not expecting great things. Following that, though, barring a complete collapse, you should beat Mississippi State at home. You definitely should beat Appalachian Christian at home. And then you go into LSU, where those games have at least been tight for the last several years. Jimbo actually has a winning record against LSU as an A&M coach, weirdly enough. So, who knows? I think 7-5 is the most likely answer. Could be 9-3. I think most of us would feel better at 9-3.
Yeah.
The reality is, even at 9-3, we make things so hard on ourselves and leave so much on the field from an offensive standpoint that it's hard to get very excited. And until I see consistent offensive domination, or at least a system that is effective, regardless of who you're playing defensively, I don't know that I'm ever going to be back bought in on Jimbo and what he's trying to do. And I don't know that he's ever going to change. So what do? Come up with $76 million.
I'm looking through my car cushions for you for that.
I appreciate that.
I do find it interesting that Lane Kiffin does a lot of poking of the bear when it comes to Jimbo. And I don't know what the logic is there. Is that part of his game? But
I think there's a lot to it, but I think there's the short story is 2 years ago. Is it 2 years ago now, where Jimbo and Nick Saban had their little blow up?
Yeah.
The off season. Lane Kiffin is a loyal little soldier to Nick Saban, and got mad that Daddy got criticized.
Wow.
And kind of since then has decided that Jimbo is his mortal enemy. I say this because some of the needling is about A&M as a school and about the players that they have, and not just about Jimbo. If you tomorrow offered Lane Kiffin the A&M job,
totally,
he would be packed before you finish the sentence.
Totally, he would.
And I don't know a lot of Ole Miss fans who believe that Kiffin's there long term anyway, because nobody's at Ole Miss long term. It hasn't happened.
And Lane Kiffin isn't it anywhere long term.
No, it's really weird to build your identity around that guy, but it's what they do because it's Oxford and it's a school full of people who couldn't get into. I could list the schools.
Ours.
I was gonna say, but it's accurate. It's a lot of kids that didn't test well. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, Rich, totally.
I was really involved. How was your GPA? I was really involved.
Yeah. Look at all the service hours I got my teacher to sign off on the day before I graduated. I mean, yes.
So how are you feeling about K-State? I know it's one of your personal bugaboo teams that you have to play, but it's not Mac Brown.
It's not Mac Brown.
Strong.
So hopefully it won't be a real neat deal. No, I do think that at the end of the day, Texas is still more talented, and I don't think that Sark is going to let them get out coached. And so, and now if it was the other Snyder on the sideline, then maybe, but no, I think that Texas will win I think it'll be 10 to 14 points. We'll win.
So what if somebody gets over the PA and it's Jim Ross and he says, "Is that Bill Snyder's theme music?" And Bill Snyder comes out on the field. Does that change your?
Yeah, I curl up into the fetal position and begin sucking my thumb for 3.5 to 4 hours.
Yeah, I do think that of your 4 games remaining on the schedule, this is probably your last tough match. Nothing against Tech and TCU, but I watched the game last night, and I would not be worried if I was playing them over the next couple of weeks. Say that. And then Iowa State is certainly down from where they've been, although that is a road game, and anything can happen in Ames, Iowa. So this is kind of the last, and it's a resume builder too, because you beat a team that's in the top, what were they, 22? That certainly helps from a perception standpoint, and college football rankings are mathematical to an extent, but there is a perception component.
Basically, it's the BCS. We're just arguing about 9 and 10 versus 1 and 2.
100%. And next year we'll be off arguing about 12 and 13.
Yeah.
But that's progress. So I think that wraps us up. You're expecting a win. I'm expecting to be miserable. It'll both happen about the same time because both games are at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Jessica's in the house for the game, and so I will tell her to leave at halftime if it's not going well.
Yeah, the nice thing about the 11 a.m. game is that you can still go out and get to Home Depot before it gets too crowded by halftime, and get that done. I don't have Bed Bath & Beyond to rely on anymore, but maybe do some grocery shopping. HEB is a great place to go if you're in Texas.
I'm going to be setting up our Christmas tree.
And with the holiday season around the corner, I think that's a good place for us to leave it until next week. For Lone Star Yell and Fight, that's James Christopher. I'm Andy Tomchesson. Enjoy your college football weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.